There was no plumbing, no electrical or anything of that sort, so there was no reason to really have any reason to go underneath once the building was built. We put a trap door in here, and when they did a lot of the earthquake work in here a few years back, they had to literally cut through the floors. That's where you see plywood and things in there to cover some of the holes that they had to put in the floor. The interesting thing about this room is for a long time it had no floor in it. Somebody had taken a handsaw, if you can imagine this, handsaw down that side, handsaw down that side, removed the flooring, and really what they were after were the floor joists, which are full 2x12 lumber. If you cross the stream down there and you look at the corral, you'll see some full 2x12 lumber, probably where the floor joist went. We can't be sure of that, but that's probably what happened to it. But you can imagine the work that had to go in, and particularly what it would have done to your knuckles is you used a handsaw down the side sawing out those floorboards. Because of the way they'd done the construction, this had been a solid floor, all the way through here, so they had to actually cut it out to get this. So this room sat vacant we just had a thing across the door there because you couldn't come in here. There was just a hole down to the bottom of where the dirt was. It was at that time when we could come in here that we started really noticing some of the things. In the 1938, 39, and 40, they had a survey crews that came in here and replaced the section corners for the land surveys that had been done here, the early ones. The early ones had been rocks with a hole drilled in it, which made it very easy for somebody to adjust it by kicking the rock over a little ways if they needed a little more room for their section corners, whatever. We don't know how the surveys were done here, but we do know that in the Midwest it was a common practice where there was fairly level to load a wagon with stones that had already been drilled, put a compass in the center of the seat up front and then put a cloth on the spoke. Count the revolutions of the wheel by every time the cloth went by, and when they hit the right distance, going in the right direction, the guy would throw a stone out. That became the section corner, which was satisfactory for the times. They probably weren't able to do it here because of that well, but the surveys weren't much better. In a lot of the cases when it came to section corners. So they moved in, they put in a pipe, they did the surveying correctly, put in pipes with a brass cap that you'll find now on most section corners. But when they were in there working this area, those 3 summers, they used the courthouse as a place to store their equipment and store some of the things. One of the interesting things that they have here is on the wall, the crew that was here in 1940, United States Government Land Office, dated it, and then they listed all of the people on the crew plus what their jobs were. And they went from the highest hierarchy. This individual here was a United States Civil Engineer, the next one was a Public Land Surveyor, went right on down the line, chainman, truck driver's chainman, axeman, right on down the line to K Police and cook. So everybody was listed on there, and that's probably one of those things that we will say when we start doing some of the interior work in here. Will probably have a piece of glass or a piece of plastic over it so that it can be seen. But it's an interesting piece of graffiti that's in the building. Great job. Sir? Yes. Might see you get mine. I'm sure.
I was going to ask him.
Do you see that one there?
Okay, over here on the door jamb is supposedly Charlie Manson's family put this on the doorway there. And it's one of those infamous things one of the names that we have in here. The story behind it, as far as we know, is Rose Walters, who lived here she was born in this area and lived in the area most of her life with her husband and family. Rose was in her last years, after her husband had died and her kids had moved away, was kind of the local watchman here for the community. She lived up where the bed and breakfast is now, and as one of her last homes while she lived here. And she kind of felt like the whole town was hers, and therefore people could come in and look, but don't take anything or don't, and she felt everything was hers. She was tough. There's no question about it. I had one group I took through, and one of the individuals was telling me, he said, this had been 20 years before. He'd driven up here, he and a friend in a motorcycle. They saw the only place in town that looked like there was anybody there. They drove up to it and introduced themselves. This woman came to the door and they introduced themselves and said they'd like to look around the town. And she hadn't said a word to them. First words out of her mouth was, do you have any guns? And this guy said, she said it with such authority that we said, yeah, we have them in our saddlebags there on our motorcycles. She said, give them to me. And again, she said it with such authority. She says, we pulled out our guns, our pistols, handed them to her. She says, yeah, you can look around town. When you guys get ready to leave, I'll let you have your weapons back. And that was it. He says, and we had no questions. He said, whatever you do, don't pick up anything and take it. He said, we were so frightened, we wouldn't even bend over and pick something up for fear that she'd think we were taking something. So it gives you a little bit of the tone of the way people looked at her and the way she acted. She did it with enough authority that there was no question. Rose was telling us that my wife and my mother and myself, close to this time this occurred, that there had been a group in here, and at that time the whole courthouse was wide open. There'd been a group in here, and they had looked around, and they'd gone down by the stream down there, and they were going to set up a camp. And Rose came down and told them that there was no camping in town, everything was private property. But there was a nice campground down at Pine Creek. Go on down there and make use of it. It had tables and all the things that they would need. And at that time, they still had drinking water there they could have. So they did. They packed up their stuff. They went to Pine Creek, stayed a few days there, came back by, and as when they came back, they stopped by the house and let her know that they really had enjoyed themselves down there. Thanked them for sending them down there. They'd had a good time. But they were heading back to their little ranch down near Death Valley, and they would be leaving the area and had to leave. But they thanked her and went on about their way. It was a short time later, she had a son that lived down in Bishop at the time, and she happened to see in the newspaper that the Tate Bianca murders had occurred, and she noticed a couple of the pictures of the people that were up on the trial, a couple of the girls, and she thought, those look familiar. And then it was a short time later when this was observed, and of course she started tying things together and thought that was probably the Manson family that had come up here on a little visit, and they had put their name in there on the wall. I doubt if Rose would have put that on there. She wasn't probably quite sophisticated enough, especially to put the peace symbol in the O. It would have been something that just wouldn't have fit. So it's one of those things where whoever did it, if it wasn't someone of the member of the family, it's there and down. And of course, every time Manson comes up for a parole, Las Vegas sends up a reporter to Belmont, and they go over and they take another picture of that in the corner there. And the file must be this thick with pictures through the years. But every time he comes up, every 4 or 5 years, he comes up for parole, and they send up a reporter and write an article. They must have a very good file on Manson at this point, because it's an automatic thing to come up here. Any questions at this point?